Hello folks, this is the first presentation that you'll be getting for the year in ninth grade world history. This is a review of elementary school and 7th grade materials that you got in on world history. The official title of this is From Early Man to the Renaissance. But in fact, we don't begin with early man. It is amazing how everything we know has its origins on this blue marble called the Earth, a world, well, that's pretty insignificant in the universe, traveling around a not so special star in a remote arm of the Milky Way galaxy, and that galaxy is just one of billions of galaxies out there. But there has been so much that has happened here, and it fills volumes and volumes and volumes in libraries. Our solar system was formed billions of years ago. We're not 100% sure. When I was growing up, we thought that the Earth in our solar system may have been a very rare occurrence, and that we were surrounded by a universe of stars with no planets or anything. Now it seems that around the universe, stars and with planets are extremely common. Who knows, within a few lifetimes, we may discover that life is teeming throughout the universe. But alas, life as we know it or understand it is just bound to Earth. And I'm sure when we do learn what really is out there, all of our perceptions will change. Much of what we know about us and the Earth have been formed within the last 50 years. For example, many of you may not realize that the Earth was not the first large body in this part of the galaxy. There was actually a large planet which was hit by a smaller planet, as you can see here, and that helped to create the moon. This is one reason why so much of the rocks in the moon resemble that of the Earth. There are plenty of videos online that you can check out if this interests you. The Earth cooled for billions of years. In fact, the crust of the Earth is relatively thin, and once you start burrowing in, it gets hotter and hotter. And we do have areas where the crust does come out in the form of volcanoes. How life formed, we're not quite sure. It's not the job of evolutionary scientists to explain how life came about, but how life evolved. But there has been, from the very, very beginning, evidence of proto-life, that is to say, the building blocks of life itself. Much of this could be found in the rocks all over the world. And by the way, don't panic. Back thousands and millions of years ago, there were no Canadian coins. Once again, from a process we have not quite figured out, although it is believed we are pretty darn close. We don't know exactly how life came to being. The current COVID-19 virus, for example, is not truly a living thing, and yet it acts like a living thing. It is believed by some that this viruses may have been the first step to what would eventually become life. But somehow, and existing for millions upon millions of years, there were only unicelled animals, I guess one could say, and through some type of genetic mutation, they started moving together, working together. Again, we don't fully know the process yet, though much of it is chemical. You began getting the formation of different cells and so on and so on and so forth, eventually until you actually had things that we would recognize as true living creatures. Human beings have been around for a few 100,000 years, it is believed, and there were many different species, all of which have gone extinct. The last one to leave us were the Neanderthals, who it is believed last died around where Portugal is right now. And the last one may have died, they believe, something like 20,000 years ago. In fact, there is evidence that some Europeans have a small percentage of Neanderthal DNA within them because the two species would often interbreed. But we're what's left, Homo sapiens. Evidence shows that there is a certain ancestor of us all, which was found in Africa. It was nicknamed Lucy. Perhaps you have heard of it. And I don't believe that Lucy is literally the great-great-great-great-grandmother of us all, but her and members of her species are perhaps where we first evolved from. It is believed that humankind started out in what is now modern-day Botswana. And as you can see here, we are looking at numbers going back over 100,000 years. For whatever reasons, they left the southern part of Africa, settling down further south, and then migrating and moving north to populate the rest of the planet. We know today that there are small groups who resist the evolution or the theory of evolution because they feel that it does not answer certain specific questions about our origins or where life comes from and so forth. In this class, we are going to be going with the scientific method. Science and the scientific method has really created the technologically rich world that we have, the sciences, the arts, and so on and so forth. We would not be where we are had it not been for science. And while science has not answered all the questions about our origins, so far there has been no competing theory to contradict it. I don't believe in evolution, but I do trust in the work of scientists. And again, in this class, we are going to assume there. Anyway, we do have, as humans, what I call the scars of evolution. We do have indications that we had moved from one type of species to another. Let's take a look at a few examples here. Apes have, as many of you know, an instinct for grasping. And most of you who had a little brother or maybe a cousin or an aunt or a niece or a nephew will notice that little children will grasp instinctively. It is believed by many that that is a scar of our ape beginnings in the jungles and velds of Africa. Another indication of human evolution is our teeth. Most of you will probably be cursed with the eruption of your molars. Some of you may have already have suffered through that already. A child has, 28 teeth. A full adult is supposed to have 32. But because we hardly use the molars, they have sort of devolved, and no longer fit in most people and have to be taken out. I'm one of the lucky few. My molars came in and they're sitting perfectly fine. Thank you very much. Maybe I'm not that evolved. All of you are aware of the appendix, which really has no reason, has been shut off through a membrane from the rest of the body. And all it's good for now is, well, getting infected and nearly killing us with peritonitis. Some of you may have a scar from a appendix operation. Something as simple as a handshake may have its origins in evolution. Think about that. When an ape fights with another ape, one of the things that each fears is getting bitten. But when an ape is about ready to give up and wants to end the fight, they do something extraordinary. They raise their arms and offer it to be bitten. That is a signal to the other ape to stop fighting, and then they go their own ways. It is believed by some that our habit of handshaking may have come from that symbol of submission. Now, I don't buy that as much as some scientists do, but it does sound credible. It's sort of like the same thing that dogs do when they get into a fight. A dog, when it knows it's going to lose and wants to get out of it, will bare its neck so that it could be bitten, and that's a signal to stop fighting. So the next time you shake hands, that is to say, if we ever shake hands again, just know it may have come from an instinct originating from our ape ancestors. Most of you have had this phenomenon before. It's a chilly day, you're getting cold, and suddenly there's goosebumps. Why on earth do we have goosebumps? Because in the days where our ancestors had fur, cold weather, and the fluffing of the fur around us was a way to keep yourself warm. We have little muscles in our skin that pulls the hairs up. We don't have the hair anymore, but we still have the little muscles. So it doesn't do much except make you look funny. It is believed by some scientists, although it has not yet been proven, so this is not really part of the theory of evolution, is that fire may have actually helped to spur the development of the human brain. It is believed that once we had discovered fire and eventually learned to harness it, was that early man was no longer subject to eating raw food. Cooked food is much easier to digest. And so, maybe millions of years ago, or hundreds of thousands of years ago at the very least, our stomachs were no longer needed to spend hours upon hours of digesting raw food. And all that energy could go into the development of the human brain. It is an interesting theory. So next time you're at home cooking a dinner, enjoying it, you might be thanking the discovery of fire for the fact that you can think and use an iPad and all of that good stuff. From Africa, humankind migrated throughout the world. As you can see here from the slide, we believe the migration had begun nearly 2 million years ago and continued on until relatively recently, in at least years of the planet, lastly coming into South America. To give you an idea of the mix of human beings, let's take this specimen of humanity who looks strikingly familiar. Well, all right, it's me. Yeah, I didn't fool you at all. A few years ago, I did a DNA test, and I was very, very surprised at the results. Um, I am not quite what I thought I was. And well, let's get an example. Let's get a look at what we really are made of. For my DNA, I'm down at 86.3 European, Ashkenazi Jewish 44.8. And you can see here, I'm also, a large percentage of me is South European, Iberian, that is to say from Spain, which works out well because my mother is from Puerto Rico and her folks were from Spain as well. But much to my surprise, I also have Greek and South Italian blood. However, my mother comes from a town called Cartagena in Spain, which was originally, wait for it, colonized by the Greeks. I have Eastern European Balkan blood, which is a complete surprise. I have Asian blood, 3.3% from Central Asia and East Asia. So I guess I don't look it, but what the heck? I think that's great. I have heritage from the America, Central and South America, Native American heritage at there, which again, who knows where it comes from. And like all of us, I do have African blood, North African blood. It may be possible that I've had some ancestors coming in from North Africa who migrated to Spain, perhaps Moorish blood. And I think all of us have East African heritage. In my case, it would have been 1.5% Kenyan. You too will probably have an incredible mix of different peoples and groups. We are all part of a much bigger family. That's not to say not to be proud of your heritage or your culture and so on and so forth. But you know, deep down, we're all a mixture of all these wonderful peoples. Humans began as hunter-gatherers, as you know, hunting, gathering, having a clear division of labor. And we are perfectly suited for this sort of thing. Humans may not be able to run that fast or that long, but we can keep walking and walking and walking, and that really helps when you're going after big game because eventually they will tire. Our ability to work in groups has come from the hunter-gatherer stage. We are not lone wolves like, let's say, cats or something like that. We work, we cooperate together. For goodness sakes, we're in a virtual classroom. We cannot not but work with one another. But about 10,000 years ago or so, something happened, and early agriculture began. Now, we don't really know why humankind decided to just stop and take up roots somewhere. It is believed that some genius had noticed that certain plants had come every year in a specific spot, and that caused people to come and gather in the same place. Others believe that there may have been someone who discovered the connection between seeds and plants. And though it's common sense to us, it must have been some absolute genius who discovered this, and so forth. Whatever it was, early agriculture was looked upon as highly superior to the, well, you're not quite sure if when you're going to get your last meal of the hunter-gatherer stage. Among the first inventions that humankind used in agriculture was the plow. Now, you may not think of the plow as much. Actually, it's no more than a stick that can go through the dirt. But the plow was an amazing innovation because it allowed you to take soil, which was, well, nominal, and turned it into something that could be used for planting. Another thing that we did early on and during the agricultural dawn of agriculture was domesticating animals. There are certain parts of the world where certain animals live, and many of these animals are tame enough in order to be herded and, alas, used for meat or for work. Our ancestors did a darn good job with cattle, cows and bulls, which of course we still use. Parts of the world consume it. Others use these not for meat, but for their milk and for physical labor. Pigs, or swine, in which many consider one of the more perfect food animals, although there are some cultures, Jewish culture, Islamic culture, who believe that these animals are unclean and not fit for consumption. But luckily enough, there are others. Goats are used, although in this part of the world it's not as popular a dish, although in other parts, especially the Middle East, goat is an absolute delicacy. Fowl, and mostly in the forms of chickens and turkeys, are extremely popular, including the eggs that we borrow permanently from the chickens and use for all sorts of different things. Camels may not be consumed. Well, I haven't seen camel meat in the Ralph supermarket recently, but camels are used, of course, for labor, for transportation, for moving goods from one place to another. Without the camel, there would not be ancient trade. Bunny rabbits, hares, and so forth, used for their meat and also for their fur. Rabbit has, alas, not been very, very popular, and I think it's due to cartoons like Bugs Bunny, where we start looking at rabbits in a very, very different way. Horses, of course, are hardly ever used for meat, but they are used for labor. They are used for transportation. And many of you, for example, may be horse owners or may ride horses occasionally. Cats have been domesticated. All right, they don't look like that. But cats are good for killing vermin and other nasty things. Although, remember, human beings, for the most part, never own a cat. The cat, for the most part, owns the human being. And then there is the dog, the canine. Originally bred from wolves, dogs have been domesticated. It's believed that the first dogs came about by wandering into hunter-gatherers' fires, by their fires, attracted by the light, where they were then the boldest ones moved closer and closer to the humans. The humans fed them with what scraps they had, and the wolves would come back. And eventually, through evolution, generation after generation, a passivity was bred into the canines, and eventually the first dogs came around, our greatest companions. Of course, don't give them a helmet like in Rick and Morty, or Snowball will turn on you. And those of you who understand what I'm talking about are laughing right now. Once we had set up agriculture, one of our biggest concerns was getting water, moisture to the plants. Now, it's not that difficult when you have rain all the time, but in some parts of the world, rain was a little less than predictable. But there were rivers where water could be channeled. Irrigation, then, is one of the great steps towards civilization, because irrigation teaches you a great deal. in order to make sure that the land that might have been flooded by waters is yours. Through irrigation, you have to learn some elementary form of geometry. You have to learn a little bit of map making and so on and so forth. Irrigation also teaches you stonework. After all, sometimes you have to create your channels through stone. Well, you just can't pull it out. You have to be able to cut and shape and maybe even adhere the stones to one another. Of course, in order to do that, you must have tools. All of you know that the first early tools were made out of different types of stone, but eventually we did discover a way to extract metal from some stones and use them for cutting, so we can have more accurate cuts and make bigger and better canals. As I mentioned before, in order to have irrigation work, you're going to need a little bit of mathematics, not only to keep the ravines straight, but to figure out whose land belongs to whom after, let's say, a large flood. Eventually, through agriculture, you have food surpluses. Now, a food surplus is worth nothing if the extra food that you grow does not survive, rots, for example, in the field. Some technology was needed in order to, well, store it. And simply by screwing around, playing around with mud, it is believed that humanity discovered pottery. After all, you take a little child, put him next to some mud, what do? They start making things with it. Again, some genius may have noticed that this little mud pie that, little Freddie made, left out in the sun to bake, got hard and could be used, perhaps, to store things without moisture. Well, with food surpluses, you get pottery, and that's a good thing. Now, from pottery, it is believed, we might have gotten written language, because after you make you fill a pot with grain or millet or any number of different grains, you need to know what's inside of the pottery, because that pottery is going to be shut until you need it again, and you can't open it each time in order to find out what the heck is in it. It is believed that the early potters then just drew a picture of whatever it is was in the pot, a few stalks of wheat, a few grains of rice, and so forth. And again, some genius may have made the connection and said, hey, wait a minute, if we can symbolize wheat or millet or rice or whatever it might be, can we not symbolize the different sounds we make so that we can record our speech? Not bad, huh? With surpluses, you have folks who don't have to work all day long as farmers. And with it, we have specialization, the division of labor. And that eventually will cause some sort of hierarchy. After all societies need people to do the work and also need people to tell those people what to do. So here is a rough idea. The farmers and the slaves on the very bottom. Craftsmen who are a bit better trained, but even so, not very high on the social ladder. Merchants a little bit higher up who have the skills of moving goods from one place to another. So that is to say, a neighboring town through merchants can get what they need that they are unable to produce themselves. Eventually, as civilization becomes more complex, you need scribes, people to write down orders, to put down what the laws might be, to tell the stories that everyone shares. Because you're now such a rich civilization, you're going to need someone to protect you. And thus you need soldiers, men, and it's mostly men, who are willing to defend and, if necessary, die the for the good of the whole, for civilization. Above them, you need the people who are in charge, government officials, nobles, priests, and so on and so forth. After all, you can't run a civilization without the bureaucrats. And on top of this all, and we see it over and over again in civilization from civilization, you have the top dog, the pharaoh, the king, the emperor, who usually in those old days claimed a sort of divinity, claimed to be God's representative on earth, or at least an incarnation of an aspect of God. Now, what's great about that is if you claim to be a god, well, no one can question your authority now, can they? It's good to be king. Religion also develops during this time as a way to explain why things happen. After all, if your civilization now allows for surpluses, it also allows for leisure time. People no longer having to farm all day will spend the rest of their day sitting and watching perhaps the stars and wondering what on earth are those little dots in the sky? Why does the sun rise every morning and come down at night? What makes the plants grow? Why are there earthquakes? What makes the wind and so forth? And human beings have an incredible ability to see patterns in things. Every time you look at, for example, the sky and look at clouds, you might see pictures in those clouds. Those pictures don't exist except in your mind. Well, it is believed by some that the origins of religion may have come pretty much the same way. We looked at the patterns of the universe, and from those patterns, we created stories that help us to understand how everything is. Now, at this moment, I would like to take just a couple of moments to talk to you about religion and our uses in this class. Of course, we're fortunate here at this school that we have peoples of all sorts of religions. We have Christians and Muslims and Hindus and Buddhists and Jews and people who are agnostic, who are not quite sure, and people who confess to be atheists, and probably many other religions that I have neglected to share with you. We have a good understanding of what other people believe in. In this class, we do not impose any belief on anyone. We, however, will be taking religion and looking at it from an historical context, because it is not my place to tell you what to believe or what not to believe. So when I speak of, for example, Christianity or Hinduism or Islam or something like that, it is not meant to get you to join one side or reject another. It is simply to share with you the information. It's up to you to decide what's right and what's wrong in your own way. So I will be presenting historical data, and I might ruffle a few feathers by giving you some historical information you may not have heard of and might contradict what you have learned. Again, this is not done to take away your religion, your faith, or to give you religion or faith. We're just looking at this historically. There were 6 areas of the world where simultaneously civilization sprung up, almost as if human beings were able to read each other's minds. These were Mesopotamia, down in the Middle East, which includes today places like Egypt and Iran. The Nile Valley, which most of you are familiar with, the cradle of civilization we call normally Egypt. The Indus River region in eastern India, bordering around where India and Pakistan are today. We have the Yangtze River region, or the valley of the Yellow River, where Asian or Chinese civilization first began. We have Mesoamerica, or Central America, where a great civilization began a little later than the other ones I shared, but they're in the running as well. And finally, the Andean region, where Ecuador and Colombia and parts of Chile are today. Civilization came about simultaneously in that place as well. And look at what these civilizations were able to do with the simple tools that I shared with you. With a plow, you get agriculture. With agriculture, you get stone making. From stone making, well, you get things like this: the pyramids of Egypt, the terracotta warriors of China, the plains of the buildings of Machu Picchu in Central America, the temples of India and Asia. In exploring civilization, there is a question of which civilization to focus on first. That is to say, where should we start? Mesoamerica and the Andes is a good candidate, but in the flow of history and based on what we know, there isn't that much to go on. And unfortunately, what we really do know about the civilization is more about their decline. So we will go and check them out a little bit later in the year. Africa is an excellent starting point because it's where humankind began. But once again, to understand our civilization, we have to understand our own institutions and so forth. And while Africa had some incredibly beautiful and complex civilizations in the past, their story, unfortunately, is marred by a lack of knowledge. We just don't know enough about ancient Africa as we wish we could, and we hope we do learn about it later. Asia is an excellent candidate to start this story. It had the longest running civilization of all time. It's still continuing today in China today. It has its ups and downs and so forth. But the problem with China is, for the most part, its history is relatively obscured in our culture. And we will, of course, go back to China too. But alas, it's not our best place to start for what we need for this class. And that brings us then to Eurasia, Europe and Asia together. And while it may sound like, well, it's the easy way out, why don't you try starting this a hard way with Asia or with Africa? Europe, for the most part, is a logical start for us. We live in a largely European cultural society. Our language is, for the most part, European, our cultures and so on and so forth. And for us, at least, this is the most logical place to start. And so we begin here. We will start then, actually, not in Europe itself, but in the Mesopotamian region. Remember, that's where Western civilization begins. And let's focus just for a moment on the Fertile Crescent, this area which includes Egypt, the land of Canaan, which is now pretty much Israel, the area of Lebanon, Iraq, Iran. Egypt is known for beginning some of the greatest technologies the world has ever had. It was in Egypt where they discovered how to pull the metal out of rocks by putting more oxygen into a fire. This is what these folks are doing by blowing into the oven there. From the Fertile Crescent, we get the first inklings of writing and literature. Many of the myths that we still follow today have their origins in that part of the world. Many agricultural techniques were discovered in the Fertile Crescent, including many of the techniques that are used in order to create better species of plant. The domestication of certain animals, for example, of cattle, of cats, of certain birds, were first achieved in the Fertile Crescent. Medical practices, some medical practices that we understand, for example, dentistry had its place here. And the wheel was one of the very first inventions that they had come across. The folks back then had a wide knowledge of mathematics. They knew about addition and subtraction, multiplication. They knew about division. They even understood quadratic and cubic equations. They understood fractions. For them, mathematics was a very important part of record keeping, and it did help them with their big building projects. The Sumerians, who are part of the Fertile Crescent groups, used not 10 digits, but 6 digits. Their common number was 60 because it was the number of the fingers in both hands, and 60 was the common principle at the time. It also helped with the months of the year. They also came up in the Fertile Crescent with our concept of time today. The 12-hour clock comes from that Sumerian fascination with the number 60. The first sundials came about during that time as well. They also brought in astronomy. They looked at the sky and they noticed that there were some stars that seemed to move from one place to another from day to day. They began calculations using relatively sophisticated mathematics to be able to predict where these stars might be in the future. Astronomy helped to explain how the universe works. Of course, some went a little bit further on this and believed that the lights in the skies somehow affected our lives. And while you may not believe in astrology, you may not believe in the zodiac, don't shunt these people aside for being so primitive. Think about it. They're looking at the universe, trying to come up with an explanation of, well, why things are the way they are. And they know that life comes from the sky. Well, there's the sun, isn't it? They knew that the sun made everything warm. The sun helped to grow plants. Obviously, the sky has power. And perhaps the configuration of those stars is one of the reasons for things being, well, what they are. Perhaps even our personalities. Of course, the zodiac and astrology is something that we today look at with some amusement. And, well, it should be treated with very little respect at all today. But it was an important stepping stone to our understanding of the universe. Much religion in the world has its origin in that observation and in the different zodiacs that existed. Which brings us then to religion. In trying to explain how the world works, the belief came, and it's a universal belief, that there are indeed invisible forces. And you can prove that there are invisible forces, can't you? The wind, you can't see it, but it's there. Now, it's believed that Western religion had its origin in Babylon and in the nation of Babylonia. Um, it's seen that Babylonian mythology was greatly influenced by the Sumerians, and they did write on clay tablets the stories trying to explain how the world is and how everything works. Now, the Babylonians were polyistic. They believed in many gods that ruled different parts of the universe. Um, they believed that there was, however, a key god or a main god. Um, they also believed that after death, every soul went into the underworld. And unfortunately, the underworld, from a Babylonian point of view, was considered a very dark and a very dismal place. We can see evidence of Babylonian religion in our times today. For example, amongst the things that they saw in their religion were winged beasts, which you can see here. Here is an influence of the Babylonian Egyptian goddess and child, which many say might be the reason in Christianity for images like this. This has not been completely proven, but many historians believe that this is the connection between Christianity and the Babylonian religions. We'll get into that a little bit later when we look at angels. All right, we are at 45 minutes, and so I'm going to stop this part right now at the beginning of Greek civilization. When we go on, when we continue next time, we'll be looking at Greek civilization, Roman civilization, and everything else that followed, including Christianity and Islam. All of you, have a good one. We'll see you later. Bye-bye.